war marches, you know, you had 70,000 people, you had 3 million people marching the streets in London in 2003 when Iraq was attacked.
3 million
so
people.
Now we find ourselves in a
completely
different situation. Where on the 15th of June of this year, we basically saw 3,000 protesters smashed to pieces in London when George Bush came and visited London. Whereas 1 week later, you saw 200,000 people in Berlin celebrating Obama, the savior supposedly of America and of a humanistic America. And how do these things link into one another? That's the question. Because 9/11 basically opened this new era, you know, of the war on terror and how things are going to proceed.
We might get shut down by
And now,
security.
Afghanistan was the first one to be attacked in the war on terror. And with Afghanistan, a country that had been ridden by war for the last 30 years, by Russian imperialism and by American imperialism, now has been facing 7 years of war.
Someone want to be cameraman?
More increase, and Afghanistan already was one of the poorest nations on this planet. And Afghanistan was invaded for a simple reason: women's liberation and human rights. And what do we see nowadays? We see neither women's liberation taking place, nor do we see human rights. We see one of the most corrupted governments on this world, you know, getting money through opium export. So with Afghanistan, something happened. Afghanistan was portrayed in the media as this good war, and Afghanistan was portrayed as, you know, this coalition of the willing with the ISAF and the NATO forces, bringing in all the European countries, and rather than just America going in for itself. So for NATO, what does NATO mean? NATO was established, you know, it's the most powerful military organization in the world, and once was used against Russia. But after the Cold War, it basically changed its task and started, you know, to attack Islamic countries. You saw the invasion in 1999 in Yugoslavia, you saw 2001, you saw NATO's involvement in Afghanistan, and in 2008, this summer, we saw NATO's invisible hand basically in the Georgian, in the Caucasus conflict. So for NATO, war means peace, and NATO doesn't bring any peace. NATO brings war, and NATO's main aim is the exploitation of foreign markets and the exploitation of resources. And in this phase of US imperialism, we need to think back of thinkers like 40 years ago, of Che Guevara, who said that if we're attacking imperialism and if we're trying to stop the war, we need to see the root of it. And that lies with America more than ever today. And even though Obama has been elected and has said that he will deploy all the troops out of Iraq, it still means that the war is continuing. And they're not just wars about women's liberation and human rights that we will be talking today about, but it's more than ever the case that the face of imperialism is more evident. And with Pakistan, once an American ally, now being attacked, you know, at the border of North Waziristan, we see that even America and imperialism can turn on its allies. And as Ibi said before, the credit crunch and the financial crisis and economic crisis is basically the factor. And that's what we're not allowed to forget. If you come into an economic pressure on the inside, you have to expand your markets. And that's what we need to be clear of. So we need a clear analysis. So since the 3rd of September, we've been seeing constant attacks of military raids on the Pakistani-Afghanistan border. And this has become the new frontier of the war of terror. And with Obama taking office in January, the new military strategy developed. And in this new military strategy, there are several goals, and this is what we're going to be speaking about today. Because we're going to be speaking about what it means for Iran that Obama has been elected, what it means for Lebanon, what it means for Palestine, and what it means for the rest of the Middle East and Pakistan as well. And with Obama's popularity, you know, new alliances can be forged, and the popularity and the bright face of Obama can bring in new allies, but as well old allies like Germany, like Great Britain can be reinforced, because they all know exactly they can count on Obama supporting them, and Germany and Great Britain and all will be supporting Obama. Yet, we aren't allowed to dismiss the fact that it's sheer imperialism that we're seeing taking place nowadays. And that's why we're organizing here, and that's why we need to stand up against the wars that are taking place around us, because they aren't just some phenomena coming out of the random, coming out of the air. There are causes and reasons behind them that we need to fight against, which is social injustice, which is economic equality, which is racism, and all of Islamophobia, and all of these. And so by shifting the emphasis of how the anti-war work has to be done in the current years. We need to be at the forefront of it, because it's students that brought down the Vietnam War. It is students that in the World War I that opposed the war at the very first. And it is students that have the power, it is students who have the power to organize, because we have time. And I tell you one thing, you know, once we're in jobs, we'll be saying, like, we could have stopped those fucking wars. Well, we're stopping them right here. And I think if we start organizing this on a regular basis, I think we can get much more people than they're here today. So what we see is Afghanistan could be Obama's next Vietnam. And we have to be very clear about that. So what we have to do is, rather than just campaigning against one specific war, we have to bring all these wars into a global perspective and in an analysis, and provide an analysis which will give activists and students the founded knowledge and grounded knowledge in how to combat these wars. So on the first weekend of April in 2009, NATO will be celebrating its 60th anniversary. And this will be a display of military power as well as economic power. With big military parades and people coming from all around the world showing, you know, transport, where actually the human rights court is going to be a military group where NATO will be celebrating its 60th anniversary. And here in Great Britain, we also must start with NATO at the forefront. Because as I said before, NATO has been actually the one providing, targeting all these countries and building alliances to create war after war after war. Yugoslavia in 1999, Afghanistan in 2001, and the story goes forward. So NATO is a threat to world peace. And what we need to do is block the roads, protest, call out the rallies like this, produce bulletins, produce teach-ins to oppose these wars and build for world peace. Thank you.
Woo!
Thank you, Mark. Next speaker will be Andy Barlow, so I'd like to introduce Andy.
Woo!
Hi there. I want to first start by mentioning a quote from Gandhi, who was a famous Indian freedom fighter against the dominant imperialism of his day, which was British imperialism. As today, the dominant imperialism is US imperialism. The British soldiers said to Gandhi, they said, Gandhi, what will happen when we leave? You will make mistakes, you know, you'll make errors. What are you going to do? How are you going to reconcile that problem? And Gandhi's answer was very, very simple. Gandhi turned around and he said clearly, yes, we'll make mistakes, but they will be our own mistakes. They'll be the mistakes that we make ourselves. And I think in the current light of one of the arguments that the imperialists make at the moment is, if we pull out of Iraq, what will happen? Well, the point is, they will make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes, but they will be the mistakes they've made themselves. They won't be suffering the mistakes of American imperialism. I think the next argument that comes through with the war in Iraq is, you know, John McCain, we need to keep the troops in for 100 years. I mean, 100 years is such a long time. I mean, women didn't have a vote in this country 100 years ago, you know. I doubt any of us would even be at university. So how we can commit to 100 years, I don't know. But the sort of argument that if we pull the troops out, there'll be absolute chaos, there'll be mass murder, that the Sunnis and the Shiite Muslims will be massacring one another. So the troops have to be there to stop this massacre. And this is a very biased and a fundamentally incorrect view of what happens. Because these same arguments were exactly the same arguments that British imperialism put in Ireland when they used to say in Northern Ireland, if the troops go, the Protestants and the Catholics will massacre each other. And in areas where the troops have been pulled out, there's been no massacre. In fact, the situation has become far more peaceful in the last 10 years in Northern Ireland when the troops have been pulled out. The reality is, foreign troops in your country, in any country, far from actually solve problems, but they create more problems. And so the actual peacefulness of Iraq would be probably far greater if Ireland, as an example, if the troops were to be pulled out. The third argument that comes through again is this argument about a war for democracy. I think the first point we have to bear in mind with this is that this argument about a war for democracy, a war to get rid of an evil dictator, didn't come about right at the start. It came about 2 years on when they realised there were no weapons of mass destruction, when they realised that there was no imminent threat to the US government. Okay, this was not, they would never have got a legal or any sort of justification to go to war with anyone on the basis of a fight for democracy. So even if we're to take them at red, you know, this argument only came about during the process, not right at the start. This was not a war for democracy. And if we're to actually look, and if we're to take them seriously and say they were genuinely going for a war on democracy, I say to those US imperialists and the UK imperialists who say it's great we've liberated Iraq, we've given them democracy, they have no understanding about how democracy was brought about. Democracy was never brought about in any country from a foreign fucking invasion. It was never brought about through troops liberating people. It was brought about through class struggle. In this country, democracy came about